Disney has turned one of the most beloved IPs in entertainment history into a series of PSAs on the importance of diversity.
I don't like to preach. I hate people to preach to me, and I don't like to preach to other people. I would tell them, we are purveyors of entertainment, we hope.
Saying that this is different from Stanley's intentions when broaching social topics in comics is a massive understatement. So Disney is finally releasing the Echo series in January, which had been delayed multiple times and is set to not only have all 6 episodes come out at once, but it will also be streaming on both Disney Plus and Hulu, which is not a sign that Disney has a lot of faith in the success of this series. Now, if you don't know or remember who Echo is, don't feel bad. She's a very minor character in the comics, and she appeared in the Hawkeye series on Disney Plus. But a trailer for the series just came out, along with an interview from the director and quotes from Marvel's head of streaming, which do not do a good job of selling it. The director goes all in on identity politics, and on top of that, she tells us how different the character is to her comic book counterpart, which is exactly what every comic book fan wants to hear. In fact, this is what Marvel's head of streaming said in order to entice the fans. In a trailer presentation, Marvel's head of streaming, Brad Winderbaum, said that Maya Lopez was an indigenous, motorcycle riding, gun toting, deaf woman with a prosthetic leg. She's an amazing martial artist and she has an incredible history. Well, that sounds like a hoot. Honestly, the last line should have come first and probably should have been the only line. Pointing out the fact that she's indigenous, deaf, and has a prosthetic leg already shrinks the appeal of this series to a very small minority. I mean, how many indigenous deaf martial artists with prosthetic legs do you have out there? And this ugly ass costume is apparently what Echo is going to be wearing at some point in the series. Now, if you want Echo to look more Native American and you don't think that her costume in the comics is good enough, you should have gone with something more like this. Now, are these examples of traditional Native American garb? I don't know, but I do know that they look like superhero costumes. This is the superhero genre. Instead, this series comes off as an edgy after school special where Hollywood tries to convince kids that learning about Native American culture is actually badass. But the authenticity goes far beyond the costume. The director, Sidney Freeland, says, "Authenticity, I think it started in the writer's room, was having very much, it's a multi-pronged approach. It's like we had to have Native representation. That was a must. We had to have deaf representation. That was a must. So it really started within our writer's room. And then I think with obviously when I came aboard, then we tried to keep that energy going, but we had Native people throughout the behind the scenes and in front of the camera as well. But I think another big thing that was important to us is the Choctaw, our partnership with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Now, Alako Cox, who plays Echo, is a deaf actress, which matches the character, and hey, if it works, it works. But the fact that more and more often you see studios bending over backwards to demonstrate that they care about authenticity is just silly. Whatever happened to using our imaginations? These are actors after all. They are grown adults being paid to play pretend. You don't need an actual deaf person to pretend to be a deaf person. You don't need a gay person to pretend to be gay. You don't need to fill the director's position or the writer's room with a certain demographic. What you need is the best person for the job, and that job is to make a great superhero series for superhero fans." She goes on to say, "Thematically, this show is sort of an exploration of trauma. How we deal with it, how we cope with it, how it affects us, how we affect it, how it affects those around us. The theme of the show is very much, we're trying to be street, we're operating a little more on a street level sort of view. These aren't cosmic consequences. It's not the fate of the universe at stake. This is the fate of a family. And what we're going to see is sort of the beginnings of the origin for not only Maya Lopez, but then also this sort of seismic sort of fracturing event that's going to affect her entire family. And that we're going to see has ripples and consequences throughout the entire show." One other thread that I haven't mentioned thus far is that we have this two-pronged approach to the series. There's this family drama sort of driving everything, but then there's this undercurrent of there's sort of a fantastical side, which is that we're going to be visiting Maya's matrilineal ancestors, going quite a bit backward in time. And that is going to those two things, this family drama and these ancestral stories that we're going to see are going to come head to head. So you've basically made another Miss Marvel, but with a mature rating. And we know how that show ended up. A diverse female who has some ancestral tragedy take place, which will help inform her character. What that sounds like is a lecture to white people on the evils of their colonial ancestors, but on a Marvel budget. We've already been through this with She-Hulk, the story of the struggles of being a woman with a Marvel budget. With a bigger budget, mind you, than Obi-Wan Kenobi. And how did She-Hulk perform? Identity politics at this level has no place in the form of storytelling. You should not be attempting to appeal to a male audience, a female audience, a black audience, or a gay audience. The only demographic that you should be appealing to is comic book fans, or people who enjoy a good superhero film. Marvel says they want to make a more grounded, more focused series that doesn't involve any of the convoluted continuity created in phases 4 and 5. That sounds great, but then why would you make a series that appeals to such a small audience? When the director tells us that representation is paramount, by now this should be a massive red flag to pretty much everyone. Do you, the audience, love comic books? Do you love superhero films? Making a movie that reflects the storied legacy of your favorite heroes is paramount. That should be the only message that we as the audience receive from Marvel and Disney. Anything else is poison to an audience that wants fun, but also engaging entertainment that introduces us to characters that we can get invested in the same way that comic book fans have become invested in the characters from the source material. But I want to return to that earlier quote from Brad Winderbaum. Maya Lopez is indigenous, she's deaf, she has a prosthetic leg, she's a martial artist. Okay, so I'm a man, I'm not Native American, and the director has made it plain that this is basically a different character from the comics. So a series written for an audience that wants to see a woman who's going to draw on the legacy of oppression from her ancestors and use powers unrelated to those of her comic book counterpart is obviously not for me. Giving the series a mature rating doesn't draw me in either. Modern storytelling, especially when it pertains to comic books, has taken the mature rating to mean that any film or television that holds it needs to be dark and gritty. Basically, an edgy teenager's idea of what it means to be mature. Rather than a movie or series that feels like a comic book but is allowed to have some violent scenes or depict some nudity in moderation. Throwing a Daredevil cameo isn't a reason for me to tune in either. We already saw how that went in She-Hulk. Other than the CGI, which allowed Daredevil to move around more like he would in the comics, it was nothing more than shallow fan service. And if you're going to watch the Echo series, you're going to once again have to sit through another sympathetic villain story, where you learn that the Kingpin is only a bad guy because he was body shamed as a kid or something. Now, going all in on identity politics isn't the only thing that will bother comic book fans. They're also changing Echo's powers. In a small interview ahead of its release, director Sidney Freeland also teased that this version of the character might be quite a bit different from the comics. Echo was famous for her ability to copy anyone's ability, which made her a formidable fighter against characters like Daredevil. It seems they have other plans for her, according to the director. She says, her power in the comics is she can copy anything, any movement, any whatever. It's kind of lame. I will say that is not her power. A female character that can copy any movements is lame? But let's look at another quote by Marvel's head of streaming. Marvel Spotlight gives us a platform to bring more grounded, character-driven stories to the screen, and in the case of Echo, focusing on street-level stakes over larger MCU continuity. Just like the comics fans didn't need to read Avengers or Fantastic Four to enjoy a Ghost Rider Spotlight comic, our audience doesn't need to have seen any other Marvel series to understand what's happening in Maya's story. Which isn't what you should be telling a streaming audience. Hey, you know those Avengers movies you love? Well, this doesn't have any connection to it. So you want to watch it now, right? What Echo has to do with Marvel Comics other than using the name of the characters, I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't have even put it under the new Marvel Spotlight label. It's basically just your typical modern, diverse action character storytelling, but with a Marvel budget. This could be a show from Amazon or Apple TV or Netflix. You could hardly tell the difference. But let me know in the comments what you guys think about the trailer and whether or not you are going to tune in to Echo when it comes out in January. As always, if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell so you never miss out on a new video. Thanks for watching.